The fluorescent lights flickered, casting an eerie glow across the empty parking lot. I suppressed a shiver and checked my watch. 2:37 a.m. 4 more hours until my shift ended, and the oppressive silence of the night was already starting to get to me. I never should have taken this job at Ted's Gas & Go, but bills don't pay themselves. Little did I know, money would soon be the least of my worries. I drummed my fingers on the scratched countertop, my eyes darting between the security monitors. The black and white screens showed nothing but stillness, pumps standing like sentinels, trash skittering across the cracked pavement. This far out on Route 16, we rarely got customers after midnight, just endless highway stretching in both directions, with nothing but darkness and cornfields as far as the eye could see. A sudden movement on one of the screens caught my attention. I leaned in, squinting at the grainy image. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw a shadow dart between two of the pumps. I blinked, and it was gone. "Get it together, Alex," I muttered, rubbing my eyes. "It's just your imagination playing tricks on you." But as the night wore on, that nagging feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every time I turned my back, the hairs on my neck stood up. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something. But there was never anything there. Just the harsh glare of the lights and my own reflection in the windows, looking increasingly frayed around the edges. At 3:15, I decided I needed some fresh air to clear my head. I stepped outside, the cool night air a welcome relief after hours in the stifling store. As I walked around the building, my footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. I paused at the corner, taking a deep breath and trying to shake off the crawling sensation under my skin. That's when I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across concrete. It was coming from the back of the station, near the dumpsters. My heart began to race. Probably just a raccoon, I told myself, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and scared. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, the scraping again, louder this time, closer. I bolted back inside, slamming the door behind me and fumbling with the lock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage it. Once secure, I pressed my back against the door, breathing heavily. "You're losing it," I whispered to myself. "There's nothing out there. There's nothing out there." But as I turned back to the counter, my blood ran cold. There, on the security monitor showing the back of the station, was a dark figure. It was hunched over, its movements jerky and unnatural. As I watched in horror, it slowly raised its head and seemed to look directly into the camera. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. This couldn't be happening. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting to 10 before opening them again. The figure was gone. My hands trembling, I reached for the phone to call the sheriff's department, but as I lifted the receiver, there was nothing. No dial tone, just dead silence. Panic rising in my chest, I pulled out my cell phone. No signal. Of course, we never got reception out here. I was completely cut off. The next few hours were a nightmare of paranoia and fear. Every shadow, every creak of the building settling sent my heart racing. I didn't dare step outside again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching, waiting. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I started to feel a glimmer of hope. My replacement would be here soon. Just a little longer, and this nightmare would be over. The bell over the door chimed, making me jump. I spun around, relief flooding through me as I saw Ted, the owner, walk in. "Mornin's, Alex," he said, hanging up his jacket. "Everything go okay last night?" I opened my mouth to tell him everything. The noises, the figure on the camera, the phone lines being dead. But looking at his familiar, friendly face in the warm light of morning, it all seemed so ridiculous, like a bad dream already fading away. "Yeah," I said finally, forcing a smile. "All quiet." Ted nodded, then frowned slightly as he looked at me. "You feeling all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed weakly. "Just tired, I guess. Long night." As I gathered my things to leave, Ted called out, "Oh, by the way, meant to tell you yesterday. Been having some problems with the phone lines and the security system. Might be some weird glitches until we get it fixed." I froze, my hand on the door. "Glitches?" Yeah, sometimes the cameras pick up these strange shadows. And the phones have been cutting out, guys coming to look at it next week. He shrugged. Technology, right? I nodded numbly and pushed open the door, stepping out into the bright morning sunshine. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I turned back to look at the gas station one last time before driving away. There, in the window, I could have sworn I saw a dark figure standing behind Ted, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a glitch, I told myself as I got into my car. Just my tired mind playing tricks on me. But as I pulled onto the empty highway, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't be coming back for another night shift. No job was worth reliving the terror of the past few hours. Whatever was out there in the darkness, whatever had been watching me all night, could find someone else to torment. As I drove home, the rising sun slowly chased away the shadows of the night. But the memory of that figure, its jerky movements and hollow gaze stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, someway, it was still out there, waiting, watching. And I couldn't help but wonder about the next poor soul who would take the night shift at Ted's Gas Go. Would they make it through the night? Or would they discover the terrifying truth behind those glitches? I shuddered, pressing down harder on the accelerator. The gas station disappeared in my rearview mirror, swallowed up by the cornfields and the dusty highway. But no matter how far or fast I drove, I couldn't outrun the lingering dread that clung to me like a second skin. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every creak of the house made me flinch. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more menacing. I told myself it was just the aftermath of fear, my mind still processing the stress of the night. But a small voice in the back of my head whispered that maybe, just maybe, what I had seen was real. Days passed, and slowly life began to return to normal. The terror of that night shift faded, becoming nothing more than a strange, unsettling memory. I found a new job at a diner in town, with normal hours and plenty of people around. But I always avoided driving past Ted's Gas Go, taking the long way around, even if it meant adding extra time to my commute. 2 weeks after that night, I was having coffee with my friend Sarah when she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Did you hear about that gas station out on Route 16?" she asked, stirring sugar into her latte. Apparently, the night attendant went missing a few days ago, just vanished during his shift. They found the store empty, lights on, register untouched. Creepy, right? I felt the color drain from my face. What gas station?" I managed to ask, already knowing the answer. "Oh, you know, that old place. Ted's something or other. Always gave me the creeps when I had to stop there late at night." I nodded mutely, my mind racing. Could it be connected to what I had experienced? Was I somehow lucky to have made it out that night? Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the missing attendant. Had he seen what I had seen? Had he encountered whatever was lurking in the shadows of that place? The guilt of not having said anything to Ted or the authorities gnawed at me. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I decided to drive out to the gas station. I told myself it was to offer any information I could to help find the missing man. But deep down, I knew I needed to confront my fears, to prove to myself that it had all been in my imagination. As I pulled into the familiar parking lot, the sun was just beginning to set. The place looked exactly the same, run down, isolated, eerily quiet. But now, yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze and a single squad car sat parked near the pumps. I took a deep breath and got out of my car, approaching the officer who was standing by the store's entrance. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I used to work here. I heard about the missing person." The officer looked at me with interest. "You worked the night shift?" I nodded. "A few weeks ago, I think I might have some information that could help." As I recounted my experience that night, the noises, the figure on the camera, the feeling of being watched, the officer's expression grew increasingly serious. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You're not the first one to report strange occurrences here," he said finally. "We've had complaints about weird noises and sightings for years, but nothing concrete ever came of it." He sighed, looking out at the darkening sky. Until now, a chill ran down my spine. Do you think whatever's out there took that man?" The officer shook his head. "I don't know what to think, but I appreciate you coming forward with this information. We'll look into it." As I turned to leave, a movement caught my eye. There in the window of the store, I saw a familiar dark figure. It raised a hand, pressing it against the glass, and even though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was looking right at me. I blinked, and it was gone. But the message was clear. Whatever haunted Ted's Gas & Go was still there, still watching, still waiting. I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could, my heart pounding. I knew I would never return to that place again. But as the gas station disappeared in my rearview mirror, swallowed up by the gathering darkness, I couldn't shake one terrifying thought. Maybe, just maybe, a part of that thing had followed me home that night. And now, it was my shadow it was hiding in. My footsteps it was echoing. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed down on the accelerator, racing against the falling night. But deep down, I knew the truth. You can't outrun your shadows, and some nights are darker than others. Story 02. The dashboard clock blinked 11:47 p.m. as my car sputtered and died, leaving me stranded on a lonely stretch of highway. I coasted to a stop, the headlights illuminating a faded sign, "Lose Gas and Service, open 24 hours. As I stepped out into the chilly night air, I had no idea that my quest for help would lead me into a nightmare I might never escape. My heels clicked against the cracked pavement as I approached the rundown gas station. The flickering neon "Open" sign cast an eerie red glow across the empty lot. I tugged my jacket tighter, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The bell above the door jangled as I entered, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet store. A man stood behind the counter, his lined face partially hidden by a scraggly beard. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice gravelly and low. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, it just died on me about a quarter-mile back. I was hoping you might have a mechanic on duty." The man, Lou, I assumed, stepped out from behind the counter. He was tall, at least a foot taller than me, and despite his age, he moved with a predatory grace that set my nerves on edge. "I'm the mechanic," he said. "Let me grab my tools, and we'll take a look." As he disappeared into a back room, I wandered around the small store. My eyes fell on a bulletin board near the register, covered in missing person posters. Most were faded and yellowed with age, but one caught my attention. It was newer, the edges still crisp. The woman in the photo could have been my sister. Long dark hair, green eyes, even the same dimple in her left cheek. I leaned in closer, my heart racing. The resemblance was uncanny. The date on the poster was just 2 weeks ago. "Find something interesting?" I jumped at Lou's voice, spinning around to find him standing right behind me. How had he moved so quietly? "Oh, I was just looking at these posters," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "So many missing people. It's sad." Lou's eyes narrowed slightly. "Lot of folks pass through here. Some of them don't make it to where they're going." A shiver ran through me at his words. I suddenly wanted nothing more than to be back in my car, broken down or not. "Should we take a look at my car?" I asked, already moving towards the door. Lou nodded, following close behind me. As we stepped outside, the cool night air did little to calm my frayed nerves. We walked in silence to my car, the only sound the crunch of gravel under our feet. Lou popped the hood and began poking around the engine. I stood back, wrapping my arms around myself, wishing I was anywhere but here. "Looks like your alternator's shot," Lou said after a few minutes. "I've got a spare back at the shop. We can tow your car there and I'll fix it up." I hesitated. The thought of being alone with this man in his shop made my skin crawl. But what choice did I have? "How long will it take?" I asked. Lou shrugged. "Couple hours, maybe. You can wait in the store if you'd like." I nodded, relief washing over me. At least in the store, I'd be visible from the road. If anyone drove by, they'd see me. We rode back to the station in Lou's tow truck, the silence between us thick and uncomfortable. As he worked to hook up my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. Back in the store, I paced nervously, checking my phone every few minutes. No signal. Of course. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. I found myself drawn back to the bulletin board, studying the faces of the missing, so many women all around my age, and that one poster, the woman who looked so much like me. The bell above the door jangled, making me jump. Lou walked in, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "All done," he said. "Want to take a look?" I followed him outside, my heart pounding. As we approached my car, a flicker of hope rose in my chest. Maybe everything would be okay after all. Lou opened the driver's side door for me. "Go ahead, give it a try." I slid into the seat, my hand shaking slightly as I turned the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then nothing. "Huh," Lou said, frowning. "Must have missed something." Pop the hood again. As I reached for the latch, movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. I turned, and my blood ran cold. There in the back seat was a coil of rope and a roll of duct tape. In that moment, everything clicked into place. The missing women, the isolated location, the way Lou had been watching me all night. I was his next target. Panic surged through me. I had to get out of here, now. But Lou was blocking the door, his massive frame filling the space. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. I forced a smile, my mind racing. "Yeah, just feeling a little claustrophobic. Mind if I step out for some air?" Lou's eyes narrowed, but he stepped back. As soon as there was space, I bolted from the car. "Hey!" Lou shouted behind me. I heard his heavy footsteps giving chase. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning as I sprinted down the dark highway. But I could hear Lou gaining on me, his longer strides eating up the distance between us. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance. A car was coming. Hope surged through me. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. "Help! Please help me!" The car slowed, and I could have cried with relief, but as it drew closer, I realized it wasn't slowing to stop. It was turning into Lou's gas station. The passenger window rolled down, and I saw a face I recognized from the missing persons board. The woman who looked like me. "Get in," she said, her voice urgent. "Quickly." I hesitated for a split second, torn between two potential dangers, but Lou's footsteps were getting closer, and I made my choice. I dove into the back seat, and the car peeled away, leaving Lou shouting in the dust behind us. What's going on?" I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "Who are you?" The woman turned to look at me, her green eyes, so like mine, filled with a mix of fear and determination. "My name's Sarah," she said, "and we're Lou's latest victims, or we would have been if we hadn't escaped." "We?" I asked, noticing for the first time that there were two other women in the car. The driver, a blonde with a fierce expression, spoke up. "I'm Jen. That's Maya in the passenger seat. We've been hiding out, trying to figure out how to stop Lou. When we saw him bring you in, we knew we had to act. My head was spinning." "But the missing person posters? How long have you been gone?" Sarah's face darkened. "Those posters are Lou's trophies. He puts them up himself to lure in more victims, women who look like the ones he's already taken." I felt sick. "How many?" "Too many," Maya said softly. "We're the only ones who've managed to escape, and now we're going to make sure he never hurts anyone again." As we drove through the night, the women filled me in on their plan. They had evidence, they said, proof of Lou's crimes. We were going to the police, and this time, they would have to listen. I sat back, my mind reeling. Just hours ago, I had been on my way home from a late night at work. Now, I was part of something much bigger, much darker. As the first light of dawn began to streak the sky, I made a silent vow. We would stop Lou. We would get justice for all the women who hadn't been as lucky as us. And maybe, just maybe, we would be able to reclaim the lives that had been stolen from us. The car sped on through the night, carrying us towards an uncertain future. But for the first time since my car had broken down, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had survived. We had escaped. And together, we would make sure that Lou's gas station never claimed another victim. As we drove, I couldn't help but think about how close I had come to becoming just another face on that bulletin board. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed the fear aside, focusing instead on the road ahead and the women beside me. We were survivors, all of us, and we would make sure that Lou paid for every life he had destroyed. The sun was just peeking over the horizon when we reached the city limits. As the familiar buildings came into view, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We had made it. We were safe. But as Jen pulled into the police station parking lot, I knew our ordeal was far from over. The real fight was just beginning. We had a story to tell, a monster to stop, and a long road to recovery ahead of us. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, standing tall beside Sarah, Jen, and Maya. Together, we walked towards the station doors, ready to face whatever came next. Our nightmare at Lou's gas station was over, but the journey to reclaim our lives was just beginning. Story 03. The old clock on the wall ticked relentlessly towards 3 a.m., each second feeling like an eternity. I'd been warned about the 3 a.m. customer, but nothing could have prepared me for the terror that walked through that door. My first night shift at the 24-hour gas end sip was about to become a waking nightmare. I'd taken the job out of desperation. Bills were piling up, and the night shift paid $1 more per hour. It seemed like a no-brainer at the time. Now, as I stood behind the counter, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, I was beginning to regret my decision. The store was eerily quiet. I'd already restocked the shelves, mopped the floors, and counted the till twice. Anything to keep my mind occupied and my eyes from constantly darting to that damn clock. 2:57 a.m. My predecessor's words echoed in my head. Whatever you do, don't engage with the 3 a.m. customer. Don't look at them, don't speak to them, just let them do their thing and leave. I'd laughed it off at the time. Graveyard shift veterans always tried to haze the newbies with scary stories. But something in the guy's eyes had seemed off, like he'd seen something he couldn't quite explain. 2:58 a.m. My palms were sweating now. I wiped them on my jeans, trying to calm my racing heart. It's just a stupid story, I told myself. Nothing's going to happen. 2:59 a.m. The low hum of a car engine cut through the silence. Headlights swept across the front of the store as a vehicle pulled up to the pump. I squinted, trying to make out the make and model, but it was obscured by shadows. 3 a.m. The bell above the door chimed, shattering the quiet. I froze, my eyes locked on the magazine rack in front of me. Don't look up, don't look up, don't look up. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. The sound of rubber soles on linoleum moving towards the back of the store. I risked a glance at the security mirror in the corner. A figure in a long, dark coat was standing in the chip aisle. Their face was hidden by the brim of a wide hat. My breath caught in my throat. This was silly. It was just a customer. Probably some poor soul working the night shift like me, stopping for a snack. Nothing to be afraid of. But as I watched, the figure began to move in a way that made my skin crawl. Its motions were jerky, almost mechanical, like a marionette being controlled by unseen strings. It moved from aisle to aisle, never picking anything up, never seeming to actually look at the products, just moving. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. Everything in me screamed to run, to get out of there. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the mirror. The figure stopped abruptly. Slowly, so slowly, it turned its head towards the front of the store, towards me. I dropped my gaze immediately, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the store. Don't look up, don't look up, don't look up. Footsteps again, coming closer. The sound of something being placed on the counter. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look at the item. A single pack of gum. My hand shook as I reached for it. As I did, I caught a glimpse of pale, almost translucent skin, long, spindly fingers that didn't seem quite human. That'll be $1.50, I managed to croak out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. The figure made no move to pay. It just stood there, silent and still. Seconds ticked by. The air felt thick, oppressive. I could hear my own ragged breathing, too loud in the quiet store. Then, a voice, low and raspy like dry leaves scraping across pavement. You shouldn't be here. I looked up before I could stop myself, and immediately wished I hadn't. Where a face should have been, there was only a swirling darkness. 2 pinpricks of light like distant stars served as eyes. The mouth was a jagged tear, opening to reveal more of that infinite blackness. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. My back hit the wall of cigarettes behind me, sending packs tumbling to the floor. The figure leaned forward, its knot face inches from mine. I could feel the cold radiating off it, like standing in front of an open freezer. "This isn't your world," it hissed. "Not in the dark hours." I squeezed my eyes shut, praying this was all some sort of stress-induced hallucination. When I opened them again, the figure was gone. The bell above the door chimed. I watched, paralyzed, as the strange car pulled away from the pump and disappeared into the night. I stood there for what felt like hours, my whole body shaking. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together enough to check the security cameras, but the footage from 3 a.m. to 3:05 a.m. was missing, just static. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. I jumped at every sound, flinched at every shadow. When my replacement arrived at 6 a.m., I practically ran out the door. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. On the 3rd day, I went in to hand in my resignation. The manager looked unsurprised. "Let me guess," he said. "You met the 3 a.m. customer?" I nodded, unable to put into words what I'd experienced. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's always the same. No one ever lasts more than a week on the night shift." What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The manager shook his head. "We don't know. It's been happening for years. Always at 3 a.m., always the same description. We've tried closing at night, but—" He trailed off, looking troubled. "But what—" "Bad things happen when we're not open, worse things than a spooky customer." I left the Gas and Sip that day with more questions than answers. In the weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself it had all been a product of an overactive imagination and too much caffeine. But sometimes, in the dark hours of the night, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, and for a split second, I'd see those pinprick eyes staring at me from the shadows. I never took another night shift job, and I avoid gas stations after dark like the plague. But I often wonder about that place, about the thing that comes at 3 a.m., and about the poor souls who, like me, find themselves face to face with something from the dark hours, because now I know the truth. When night falls and the world grows quiet, there are things moving in the shadows, things that don't belong in our world. And sometimes, if you're very unlucky, you might just catch a glimpse of them. The 3 a.m. customer taught me that there are spaces between our world and somewhere else. Liminal spaces where the veil grows thin. And in those spaces, in those dark hours, anything can happen. I've tried to move on with my life. I got a day job, went to therapy, even moved to a new city. But I can't shake the feeling that I glimpsed something that night that I wasn't supposed to see, that I know a truth about the world that most people are blissfully unaware of. Sometimes I find myself driving past 24-hour gas stations late at night. I always slow down, peering through the windows. Part of me is terrified I'll see that figure again, standing motionless in an aisle. But another part almost hopes I will. Because as scared as I am of what I saw that night, I'm even more afraid of what it means. If that thing exists, what else is out there in the dark? What other creatures walk among us when we're not looking? I've started collecting stories. Online forums, hushed conversations in bars, snippets overheard on buses. It seems I'm not the only one who's had a run-in with something unexplainable in the dead of night. There are others out there like me. People who've seen things they can't explain, who've brushed up against the edges of our reality. We're like members of a secret club none of us wanted to join. But knowledge, once gained, can't be unlearned. And now that I know what's out there, I can't look at the world the same way. So I keep watching, keep listening, keep piecing together the puzzle of what's really going on in those dark hours when most of the world is asleep. And every night, as the clock ticks towards 3 a.m., I say a silent prayer for whoever is working the graveyard shift at that Gas and Sip. Because I know that somewhere out there, In the shadows between worlds, the 3 a.m. customer is getting ready to make its nightly visit. And God help whoever is behind that counter when it walks through the door. Story 04. The rumble of my rig's engine cut out as I pulled into the truck stop, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Little did I know, the whispers I'd hear in this bustling pit stop would turn my routine rest period into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. I'd been on the road for nearly 11 hours straight, my eyes heavy with fatigue as I maneuvered my 18-wheeler into a parking spot. The big Rig Oasis truck stop was a welcome sight, its neon signs promising hot food, showers, and a place to catch some shut-eye before hitting the road again. As I climbed down from the cab, my boots hitting the cracked asphalt, I caught snippets of conversation from a group of drivers huddled near the entrance. Third one this month? Just vanished without a trace. Something ain't right round here. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to road gossip. Truckers were always swapping stories, each one more outlandish than the last. Still, a shiver ran down my spine as I pushed open the door to the diner. The smell of greasy food and strong coffee hit me like a wall. I slid into a booth, the vinyl seat squeaking beneath me. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag reading Darlene shuffled over. "What'll it be, hun?" she asked, pen poised over her notepad. "Just coffee and a slice of apple pie, thanks," I replied, my voice gravelly from hours of disuse. As Darlene walked away, I couldn't help but overhear the conversation from the next booth. "I'm telling you, Jim, it ain't natural," a gruff voice said. "Drivers don't just disappear into thin air." "Keep your voice down, Frank," another man hissed. "You want to end up like Buddy?" I tried to focus on the laminated menu in front of me, but my curiosity was piqued. Disappearing drivers? It sounded like something out of a bad horror movie. Darlene returned with my coffee and I decided to probe a little. "Say, Darlene," I began, trying to keep my tone casual. I couldn't help but overhear some talk about missing drivers. That just trucker tall tales, or is there something to it? Darlene's eyes darted around nervously before she leaned in close. "Listen, sugar," she whispered. "I don't know what's true and what ain't, but I do know that in the past 6 months we've had 5 regulars who just never showed up again. No calls, no nothing. It ain't like them." A chill ran through me, despite the diner's stuffy warmth. "Any idea what happened to them?" Darlene shook her head. "Police say they probably just found better routes, moved on, but..." She trailed off, glancing over her shoulder. "Some folks around here think there's more to it. Just be careful, okay? Don't go poking around where you shouldn't." With that cryptic warning, she hurried off to tend to other customers, leaving me with a cold cup of coffee and a growing sense of unease. I finished my pie quickly, suddenly eager to get back to the safety of my rig. As I paid my bill, I noticed a bulletin board near the register, plastered with missing person flyers. My blood ran cold as I realized they were all truck drivers. Back in my cab, I tried to shake off the creeping dread that had settled over me. It was just coincidence, I told myself. Drivers changed routes all the time. There had to be a logical explanation. But as I settled into my bunk for my mandated rest period, sleep eluded me. The whispered conversations and Darlene's warning played on a loop in my mind. I found myself straining to hear any unusual sounds outside, jumping at every creak and groan of the truck stop settling around me. Sometime after midnight, a sharp tap on my door jolted me from a fitful doze. My heart raced as I peered out the window, half expecting to see some monstrous figure. Instead, I saw another driver, his face pale in the glow of the parking lot lights. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open. "Yeah? Sorry to bother you, man," the driver said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I think someone's messing with my rig. Heard some weird noises, saw a shadow. Was hoping you might have seen something." I shook my head. "Sorry, I've been trying to sleep. You want me to come take a look?" The driver glanced over his shoulder nervously. "Nah, it's okay. Probably just my imagination running wild with all these stories going around. Thanks anyway." As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just dodged a bullet. What if it had been a trap? What if he wasn't really a driver at all? Sleep was impossible now. I sat up in my bunk, every sense on high alert. The truck stop, which had seemed so ordinary just hours ago, now felt sinister. Every shadow held potential danger, every sound a possible threat. As the hours crept by, I found myself watching the comings and goings of the parking lot through a gap in my curtains. Most of it was normal truck stop activity, drivers arriving, departing, making their way to and from the main building. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A sleek black car, out of place among the big rigs, pulled up near the edge of the lot. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their movements purposeful and alert. They scanned the area before approaching one of the parked trucks. I watched, barely daring to breathe, as one of the men produced some sort of device. He ran it along the side of the truck, pausing near the fuel tank. His partner kept watch, one hand inside his jacket in a way that suggested he was armed. After a few minutes, they returned to their car and drove off, leaving no trace of their presence except the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. What had I just witnessed? Were these men responsible for the disappearances, or were they investigating them? Either way, I knew I was in way over my head. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here any longer. Missing my rest period be damned, I needed to get on the road. I started up my rig, the familiar rumble of the engine providing little comfort. As I pulled out of the truck stop, I caught sight of Darlene arriving for her morning shift. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw a mixture of understanding and fear in her gaze. I hit the open road with a sense of relief, putting miles between myself and the big rig oasis. But the further I drove, the more I second-guessed myself. Should I have reported what I saw, gone to the police? Or would that have just made me the next driver to disappear? For weeks after, I avoided that stretch of highway like the plague, taking longer routes and losing money in the process. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brushed up against something dark and dangerous, something that had already swallowed up other drivers who were just trying to make a living. I heard more whispers as time went on. Other truck stops, other disappearances, always the same pattern. Experienced drivers vanishing without a trace, their rigs found abandoned days or weeks later. Some nights when I'm parked at a rest area trying to sleep, I still see those men in black suits in my mind's eye. I wonder about the device they used, about what they might have been looking for. And I wonder if someday they'll come looking for me. The trucking community is tight-knit, but there's a current of fear running through it now. We watch each other's backs, share information about safe routes and places to avoid. But we all know that at the end of the day, when we're alone in our rigs on some dark, lonely stretch of highway, we're vulnerable. I've thought about quitting, finding a nice, safe job on solid ground. But this is my life, my livelihood. And part of me feels like I owe it to those missing drivers to keep going, to stay alert, to maybe someday find out the truth about what happened to them. So I keep driving, keep watching, keep listening. And every time I pull into a truck stop for the night, I say a little prayer that I'll wake up in the morning, ready to hit the road again. Because out here on the highways and byways of America, there's something stalking truckers. And none of us know if we'll be the next to disappear into the night, leaving nothing behind but an abandoned rig and a missing person flyer on a truck stop bulletin board. Stay safe out there, drivers. And if you find yourself at the big rig oasis in the dead of night, keep your doors locked and your eyes open. You never know who or what might come knocking. Story 05. The world ended on a Tuesday. Or at least, that's what it felt like when the quarantine barriers went up, cutting off our little slice of suburbia from the rest of civilization. And there I was, stuck in the middle of it all, watching as my gas station became ground zero for the panic, desperation, and horror that followed. I'd been working the morning shift at Pete's Gas & Go, just like any other day. The news had been buzzing about some new virus for weeks, but nobody really took it seriously. Not until the men in hazmat suits showed up, cordoning off a 5-mile radius with my gas station smack in the center. At first it was just confusion. Cars lined up at the pumps, people filling their tanks, just in case. Then came the fear. It spread faster than any virus could, infecting everyone with a panicked need to escape. I watched from behind the bulletproof glass as a woman in a minivan screamed at a soldier, her kids crying in the back seat. "You can't do this!" she shrieked. "We have to get out!" But the soldier just stood there, impassive behind his mask, assault rifle held at the ready. The message was clear: no one in, no one out. As the day wore on, the situation at the gas station deteriorated rapidly. We quickly ran out of gas, but that didn't stop people from coming. They raided the store, fighting over bottles of water and bags of chips like they were bars of gold. I tried to maintain some semblance of order, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. By nightfall, the windows were smashed, the shelves were bare, and I was huddled in the back office, wondering how the hell things had gone so wrong so quickly. The next morning brought no relief. If anything, the desperation had intensified. People who had been turned away the day before came back, more determined than ever to get something, anything. A man with wild eyes and a baseball bat approached the counter. "You gotta have more stuff in the back," he said, his voice a low growl. "I got kids to feed." I held up my hands, trying to keep my voice steady. "I swear, man, everything's gone. I'm in the same boat as you." He didn't like that answer. The bat came down on the counter, sending splinters of wood flying. I scrambled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hey!" a voice shouted. I looked up to see Pete, the owner, standing in the doorway, shotgun in hand. "Back off, or the next sound you hear will be your head hitting the floor." The man with the bat hesitated, then slowly backed away. Pete kept the shotgun trained on him until he was out of the store. "You okay, kid?" Pete asked, not taking his eyes off the parking lot. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. Pete sighed, lowering the gun. "This is going to get worse before it gets better. You should head home while you still can." But I couldn't. My apartment was outside the quarantine zone. I was as trapped as everyone else. As the days wore on, a strange sort of routine developed. The military set up a distribution center in the gas station parking lot, handing out rations and medical supplies. People lined up for hours, the fear of the virus warring with their fear of going hungry. I found myself working alongside the soldiers, helping to organize the supplies and keep the peace. It was surreal, watching people I'd known for years, neighbors, regulars at the gas station, transform into desperate strangers. Mrs. Johnson, who used to come in every Sunday for her lottery tickets and always had a kind word, now glared at me with suspicion as I handed her a box of canned goods. Mr. Ramirez, the high school math teacher, got into a fistfight with another man over the last package of diapers. The worst part was the waiting. Waiting for news, waiting for a cure, waiting for something to change. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the virus was a hoax, a government conspiracy. Others swore they'd seen infected people being taken away in the night, never to be seen again. I didn't know what to believe. All I knew was that with each passing day, the atmosphere grew more tense, more volatile. It was about a week into the quarantine when things really went to hell. A group of people, fed up with being trapped and scared, decided they were going to break out. They gathered whatever weapons they could find, kitchen knives, baseball bats, a few hunting rifles, and marched on the barricade. I watched from the roof of the gas station as they approached the line of soldiers. There was a moment of terrible stillness, like the whole world was holding its breath. Then someone fired a shot. I don't know who shot first, one of the soldiers or one of the civilians. It didn't matter. In seconds, the air was filled with the deafening sound of gunfire and screams. I ducked down behind the low wall of the roof, my hands over my ears, my eyes squeezed shut. But I couldn't block out the sounds of chaos and pain below. When it was over, when the gunfire had faded to a terrible silence, I peered over the edge of the roof. The scene below was like something out of a war movie. Bodies lay scattered across the pavement, blood mixing with spilled gasoline to create dark, oily puddles. The soldiers were moving among the fallen, checking for survivors. Those who could walk were being rounded up, hands zip-tied behind their backs. I made my way down from the roof on shaky legs, feeling like I was moving through a nightmare. Pete was waiting for me at the bottom of the ladder, his face ashen. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "What have we become?" I didn't have an answer for him. I don't think anyone did. The aftermath of the failed breakout attempt changed everything. The military clamped down hard, imposing a strict curfew and rationing supplies even further. Anyone caught outside after dark was subject to immediate arrest, or worse. But it wasn't just the increased restrictions that changed things. It was like that burst of violence had torn away the last vestiges of civility, revealing the raw desperation underneath. People stopped looking each other in the eye. Conversations, when they happened at all, were terse and guarded. Everyone was a potential threat, a competitor for the dwindling resources. I found myself longing for the early days of the quarantine, when there had still been a sense of community, of everyone being in it together. Now it felt like we were all alone, each of us an island in a sea of fear and mistrust. Weeks turned into months. The gas station, once a hub of activity, now stood as a silent sentinel. The pumps were dry, the shelves bare. Pete and I took turns standing guard, more to have something to do than out of any real need. News from the outside world was scarce and often contradictory. One day we'd hear that a cure was just around the corner, the next that the virus had mutated, becoming even more deadly. I lost track of the days, marking time by the changing of the guards at the barricade and the weekly supply drops. My world had shrunk to the confines of the quarantine zone, and even that felt like it was closing in more each day. It was during one of these supply drops that I saw her, a young woman, probably around my age, with tired eyes and a determined set to her jaw. She was arguing with one of the soldiers, gesturing angrily at the meager rations she'd been given. I don't know what made me do it, but I found myself walking over, a few extra cans of food tucked under my arm. "Here," I said, holding out the cans. "Take these." She looked at me suspiciously, then at the soldier, who just shrugged. "Why?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I shrugged. "Because we're all in this together, or at least we should be." For a moment I thought she might refuse, but then her face softened just a bit, and she took the cans. "Thanks," she said. "I'm Sarah." "Jake," I replied. It wasn't much, just a small act of kindness in a world that had seemingly forgotten what kindness was. But as I watched Sarah walk away, the extra cans clutched to her chest, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, we hadn't lost our humanity entirely. Maybe there was still a chance for us to come together, to survive this not just as individuals, but as a community. As I turned back to the gas station, I caught sight of my reflection in the cracked window. I hardly recognized the person staring back at me, gaunt, haunted, aged beyond my years. But there was something else there too, a spark in the eyes that hadn't been there before. The quarantine had changed us all. There was no denying that. But as I watched the sun setting over the barricades, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, I allowed myself to believe that this wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, and maybe, just maybe, it would be one where we remembered what it meant to be human.